Sir, please do not drink that yet. The sentence cut through the private ballroom of the Langford House Hotel so softly that, for one strange second, the entire charity dinner seemed to lean toward the waitress instead of the billionaire. Emma Walker stood beside a polished silver service cart beneath the warm chandeliers, a 28-year-old white waitress in a pressed white shirt, black vest, clean black apron, and low black shoes that had carried her through 10-hour shifts without complaint. Her dark blonde hair was tied back neatly. Her face was calm, not timid, not dramatic, calm in a way that made people uncomfortable because it did not ask permission. Across from her, Charles Bennett paused with a crystal glass halfway to his mouth. He was 47, a white billionaire and chief executive officer of Bennett Medical Ventures, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit with a pale blue tie and a watch that flashed silver whenever his wrist moved. Around him sat hospital executives, medical donors, board members, and people who smiled as if every problem in the world could be solved by naming a wing after themselves. Tonight, Charles was the center of it all, the man funding a new emergency diagnostics program, the man cameras had followed through the lobby, the man no one interrupted, especially not a waitress. The mocktail in his hand glowed amber under the chandelier light, finished with a thin curl of citrus and a glossy ribbon of syrup that the bartender had poured only moments earlier. Emma had seen that pour from across the room. She had also heard the event director tell the kitchen to move faster. She had heard the word hazelnut once, almost swallowed by the clatter of plates. And then she had seen Charles lift the glass. Charles lowered it just enough to look at her over the rim. His expression did not show fear, only irritation, sharpened by public embarrassment. "Miss," he said, his voice smooth and cold, "you are becoming a distraction." A few guests shifted in their chairs. Someone gave a polite laugh that died quickly. Martin Cole, the event director, appeared near Emma's shoulder with a smile meant for donors and eyes meant as a warning. "Emma," he whispered, "step back." Now, Emma did not move. In the pocket of her apron, a small laminated card with worn corners pressed against her order pad. One edge had slipped out when she reached for her pen earlier, then disappeared again beneath the black fabric. Her fingers touched it once through the apron, a motion so small most people missed it. Charles did not. He glanced at her hand, then at her uniform, as if the explanation for her courage had failed to appear where he expected it. "This room needs focus," he said. "Not interruptions." Emma nodded, almost respectfully. "Yes, sir." "Then do your job." The words landed in front of everyone. Clean. Final. A line drawn between the man who owned medical companies and the woman paid to refill water glasses. Emma looked at the drink again. The syrup clung to the inside of the glass like honey. Charles's thumb tightened around the stem. Martin leaned closer, already preparing an apology to smooth the moment away. But Emma's eyes stayed on the billionaire's wrist, where the edge of a medical alert bracelet flashed briefly beneath his cuff before vanishing again. Her voice remained low. "I am trying to." The ballroom went still. Charles stared at her, annoyed that she was not frightened. But Emma Walker was not watching his anger. She was watching his breathing. Charles Bennett kept the glass raised, but he did not drink. That was the first thing Emma noticed. Not his irritation, not the dozen wealthy faces turning toward her as if she had spilled wine across the tablecloth. The glass had stopped inches from his mouth, suspended between pride and warning. Martin Cole stepped in quickly, his tailored black event suit moving like a curtain meant to hide an unpleasant scene. "Mr. Bennett, I apologize," he said, smiling too hard. "Our staff is trained not to interrupt guests during the program." The word staff came out soft, polished, and heavy. Emma stood beside the service cart with both hands folded in front of her apron. She looked smaller there, surrounded by chandeliers, donors, hospital presidents, and men who discussed life-saving technology over 5-course dinners. But she did not shrink. Charles set the glass down with a quiet click. "Is there a problem with the drink?" he asked. "Or with your ability to follow instructions?" A few people looked down at their plates. One woman in pearls pressed her napkin to her mouth, pretending not to listen. Emma's eyes moved to the amber liquid, then to the thin shine of syrup sliding slowly along the inside of the glass. "I would like the bartender to confirm the garnish and syrup, sir." Martin's smile tightened. "The beverage menu was approved this afternoon." "Menus change," Emma said. "So do trays." The answer was calm, almost too calm. Charles leaned back, his jaw set. Miss Walker, I run companies that design emergency diagnostic systems for hospitals across the country. I am aware that details matter. He paused, letting the room feel the distance between his world and hers. But this is a charity dinner, not an emergency room. The remark should have embarrassed her. That was its purpose. Instead, Emma lowered her gaze for one breath, and her thumb brushed the worn edge of the laminated card hidden in her apron pocket. She did not take it out. She did not explain it. She only looked back at him with a steadiness that made the young resident doctor at the far end of the table stop smiling. That is exactly why I asked quietly, she said. Martin moved closer. Emma, you are done in this room for now. He reached for the service card handle, not touching her, but claiming the space around her. We will send another server. Charles looked away as if the matter had been solved. Good. The word landed like a door closing. Emma nodded once, accepting the dismissal with more grace than the room deserved. She turned toward the side entrance, but the bartender appeared behind Martin carrying a fresh tray, and Emma heard him whisper to a banquet assistant. They wanted the hazelnut one at table 1, right? Her step stopped. Only one step. No drama. No raised voice. Just a pause sharp enough for Charles to notice. Martin's eyes flashed with warning. Keep moving. Emma did not look at him. She looked at Charles instead. Beneath his cuff, the silver edge of the bracelet appeared again as he adjusted his sleeve, hiding it from the room as naturally as wealthy men hid weakness. His throat moved once, a small swallow, dry and controlled. Emma saw it. Charles saw her see it. For the first time, annoyance gave way to something less certain. What are you staring at? He asked. Emma's voice stayed low. The one detail everyone keeps covering. The one detail everyone keeps covering. The phrase moved through the table more quietly than an accusation, but it landed harder because Emma did not dress it up. Martin Cole stared at her as if she had forgotten the shape of the room, the donors, the cameras outside, the entire polished machine that made rich people feel safe, while other people carried trays around them. That is enough, he said, no longer smiling. You are embarrassing yourself. A few guests looked relieved to have someone name her as the problem. A hospital trustee with silver glasses gave a small, uncomfortable laugh. Perhaps she has been watching too many medical shows. The comment was not cruel enough to be challenged, which made it worse. Emma did not answer it. She looked once toward the bar, where the bartender had set down the bottle with the amber label turned partly away. She looked at Charles's glass, then at the cuff covering his wrist. Her face stayed calm, but something old passed behind her eyes, fast as a shadow. Charles noticed. He had spent decades reading boardrooms, investors, rivals, men who lied with perfect posture. He knew performance when he saw it. Emma was not performing. That irritated him because it made her harder to dismiss. Miss Walker, he said, lower now. If you have an actual concern, state it clearly. Otherwise, leave the room. Martin exhaled, as if grateful for the final chance to end this cleanly. Emma's hand moved to her apron pocket. The laminated card inside bent slightly beneath her fingers. Its corners were worn smooth from being carried too long. She did not pull it out. She only touched it once, and her breathing changed by a fraction. Charles's eyes followed the motion. What is that? He asked. Emma looked at him. A reminder. Of what? Martin cut in before she could answer. Mr. Bennett, with respect, this is becoming inappropriate. Our culinary team has handled dietary requests for cabinet members, surgeons, and ambassadors. We do not need a server turning garnish into a crisis. Emma finally turned to Martin. Did the kitchen run the allergy check after the dessert tray changed? The room shifted, not because anyone understood the full danger, because her question was specific, too specific for a waitress supposedly guessing. The bartender froze near the service entrance. A banquet assistant looked down at the clipboard in her hands, suddenly interested in the floor. Martin's jaw tightened. We were behind schedule. Emma did not blink. That is not an answer. Charles stopped reaching for his glass. The movement was small, but the table saw it. He looked at Martin now, not Emma. For the first time, his irritation had changed direction. Still, pride held him in place. This is a medical foundation dinner, Charles said, as if reminding himself. We are not careless people. Emma's expression softened, not with pity, but with recognition. Careless people usually do not think they are careless, sir. They think they are busy. The words struck something in Charles before he could block them. His face changed by one quiet shade. and for the first time that night, he had no immediate reply. The room did not recover from Emma's last sentence. It tried to. A fork touched porcelain. Someone cleared a throat. The soft jazz from the adjoining ballroom drifted through the open doors as if nothing in the world had changed. But around Charles Bennett's table, the air had tightened. Martin Cole looked toward the service entrance, silently ordering someone to fix what he now seemed unable to name. The bartender stood near the bar with the syrup bottle in his hand, his face carefully blank. Emma noticed the bottle had been turned so the front label faced the wall. A small thing, too small for anyone else to care about. Her eyes moved from the bottle to Charles's glass, then to the cuff he had pulled slightly lower over his wrist. Charles followed her gaze and felt annoyance rise again, not at her this time, but at being observed. He had built an empire around precision, around machines that caught what human eyes missed. Yet here was a waitress in a black apron making him feel exposed in front of the very people who praised his judgment. He reached for the glass as if reclaiming control, but his hand stopped around the stem. The crystal felt cool under his fingers. He did not lift it. "Martin," he said, his voice controlled. "Answer her question." Martin smiled, but the smile did not settle. The kitchen followed the approved menu. That is not what she asked. The donors looked between them. One hospital executive lowered his napkin onto the table and stopped pretending to eat. Emma remained still beside the service cart. Her thumb rested against the laminated card in her pocket, but she did not draw it out. Not yet. The memory inside it was not for this room to inspect like a document. It was only there to keep her hand steady. Martin glanced toward the bartender. There was a last-minute substitution, he admitted carefully. The original syrup ran out. The replacement was from the premium bar stock. It is used often. Ingredients? Emma asked. Her voice stayed low. Martin's eyes hardened. You are not in charge of this event. No, Emma said. But I am still responsible for what I put in front of a guest. The sentence landed differently from before. Not defiant. Professional. The young resident doctor at the far end of the table looked at Charles's glass now with open concern. Charles noticed that too, and something in his confidence shifted another inch. He turned to the bartender. Bring the bottle. The bartender hesitated. Martin's face went pale with irritation. That is unnecessary. Charles looked at him. Then it will be quick. The bartender approached with the bottle held low, label still angled away. Emma did not reach for it. She only stepped aside so Charles could see. Her restraint made the moment heavier. Charles leaned forward, but before he could read anything, Martin placed a hand lightly near the bottle, not touching Charles, just interrupting the view. Mr. Bennett, we are already behind schedule. The donors are waiting for your closing remarks. Emma looked at Charles's throat as he swallowed again, slower this time. She looked at the glass. Then she quietly placed a full glass of plain water beside his plate and moved the mocktail one careful inch farther from his hand. No one spoke. That tiny movement changed the room more than any speech could have. The mocktail sat 1 inch farther from Charles Bennett's hand, and somehow that inch became impossible for anyone at the table to ignore. Emma Walker did not push it away again. She did not touch the bottle. She simply stood beside the service cart with the plain water now closest to him, her hands folded, her face quiet. The young resident doctor leaned forward first, no longer hiding his concern behind politeness. Mr. Bennett, he said carefully, it might be reasonable to verify the ingredients. Martin Cole shot him a look, but the doctor did not look away. That was when the room began to change. Not all at once. One donor stopped whispering. A hospital executive glanced at the bartender. A woman in a navy evening jacket looked at Emma with something different from annoyance. Curiosity, maybe. Or guilt. Charles felt the shift and disliked it. He was used to commanding doubt, not becoming the center of it. This is excessive, he said, though his voice had lost some of its edge. I have attended hundreds of events. I know how to manage my own health. Emma nodded. I believe you. The answer disarmed him because it carried no argument. Then why are you still standing here? He asked. Emma looked at the glass, then at his wrist. Because people who manage things well can still be failed by people in a hurry. Martin stepped forward. That is an unfair accusation. It is a fair question, Emma replied. Was the replacement syrup checked against the guest dietary list? The bartender lowered his eyes. Martin did not answer quickly enough. Charles noticed. Everyone did. Emma's fingers brushed the laminated card again, this time slower. As if the question had touched a place inside her she did not want to open in front of strangers. Charles saw the motion and felt a flicker of recognition, though he did not yet know what he recognized. It was not fear. It was memory held down by discipline. "You speak like someone who has done this before," he said. Emma's gaze lifted to him. "I have watched people wish they had asked sooner." The words were gentle, but something in them passed through the chandelier light and settled heavily over the table. A server near the wall looked at Emma with widened eyes, as though she had heard a version of this story in the break room but never understood its weight. Charles looked down at the cuff of his shirt. The bracelet beneath it suddenly felt less like a private inconvenience and more like a truth he had tried to fold out of sight. He pulled his wrist slightly back, not enough to reveal it, only enough to feel the metal against his skin. Emma noticed, but said nothing. That silence gave him no place to push against. He picked up the water glass instead of the mocktail. The movement was small, almost invisible to anyone who had not been watching every breath. But Emma had been. Martin's face tightened. "Mr. Bennett, your remarks are scheduled in 4 minutes. Charles did not answer him. He looked at Emma's apron pocket, where the worn corner of the laminated card had finally slipped into view again. No name could be read. No explanation was offered. Just a card carried too carefully to be random. For the first time, Charles did not look at Emma like a waitress delaying his evening. He looked at her like someone who might have arrived from a moment he had never survived. Charles Bennett had spent his life trusting systems. Board systems. Hospital systems. Investment systems. The kind of systems built by people with degrees framed on walls and voices trained never to shake. But in that moment, with the mocktail cooling on the linen and the plain water untouched in his hand, the system that held his attention was a waitress standing beside a service cart, watching details everyone else had treated as background. Emma Walker did not look like a person trying to win. She looked like a person trying not to remember. That difference unsettled him. Martin Cole checked his watch again, then leaned toward Charles. "Sir, the closing remarks cannot wait much longer. The donors are expecting you." Charles heard him, but his eyes remained on Emma. "You said you have watched people wish they had asked sooner." Emma's fingers stilled against her apron pocket. Around the table, the room seemed to draw closer without anyone moving. The young resident doctor watched her carefully. The bartender stood near the bar with the syrup bottle lowered at his side. Martin's polished face had gone rigid, as if every second of uncertainty personally offended him. Emma took one slow breath. "I volunteered in an emergency room for almost 2 years," she said. Martin gave a short laugh, not quite brave enough to be loud. "Volunteered?" Emma nodded. "Yes." She did not defend the word. She let its smallness sit there until it became larger than his tone. Charles looked at her differently now. Not with trust yet. Trust would have been too quick. But the clean certainty he had used to dismiss her had begun to crack. "And that makes you qualified to stop my dinner?" he asked. "No, sir," Emma said. "It makes me slow down when I see 3 things at once." "Which 3? The question came before he could stop it. Emma looked toward the bar. "A replacement syrup, no one wants to turn around." She looked at his wrist. "A bracelet you keep hiding." Then her eyes came back to his face, softer now. "And the way you swallowed after the first small sip." Charles felt his throat then, not as pain, not even as fear, but as awareness. A dryness he had been calling nerves. A tightness he had been calling irritation. He set the water down. The glass touched the table with a soft sound that seemed too loud. Martin stepped in. "This is inappropriate. She is speculating in front of guests. She is observing," the resident doctor said quietly. The shift was small, but it mattered. Someone in the room had crossed from politeness into concern. Emma's gaze dropped to the laminated card in her pocket. This time, she drew it halfway out, just enough for the worn plastic edge to catch the chandelier light. No one could read it. No one needed to. It looked like something carried through years, not shifts. "School taught me terms," she said. "The emergency room taught me pace. But the reason I remember this is not school." Her voice thinned, then steadied. "My little brother once told a room of adults, 'My throat feels strange.' They told him he was scared." The room went completely quiet. Even Martin stopped breathing loudly. Charles looked at the card again. The confidence he had worn all evening began to feel heavy, poorly fitted. He had called her a distraction. He had nearly sent away the only person who had been watching the right things. Emma slid the card back into her apron pocket and lifted her eyes to him. She did not accuse him. She did not ask for pity. She asked one precise question, low enough that only the table heard it. Mr. Bennett, do you carry an epinephrine auto-injector? For 1 second after Emma asked the question, no one moved. Charles Bennett looked at her as if the room had tilted under him. The mocktail sat on the white linen, untouched now, its amber surface catching the chandelier light with an innocence that felt almost insulting. Martin Cole opened his mouth, then closed it. The young resident doctor pushed back his chair halfway, careful not to alarm the donors, but ready enough that Charles noticed. Mr. Bennett, Emma repeated, still calm. Do you carry an epinephrine auto-injector? Charles's hand went to his jacket almost before pride could stop it. His fingers touched the inside pocket. The answer was there. That alone changed the room. A woman near the end of the table whispered, "Oh my goodness," then covered her mouth. Charles drew the auto-injector out slowly, not using it yet, only holding it in his palm like a secret he had kept too well. His cuff slipped back. The medical alert bracelet was visible now, silver against his wrist, plain under all the wealth in the room. Severe tree nut allergy. The resident doctor stood fully. We need to verify that drink immediately. Martin's voice tightened. The syrup is standard bar stock. Emma did not look away from Charles. Please turn the bottle around. The bartender, pale now, lifted the bottle with both hands and rotated it toward the table. The label was small, decorative, easy to miss in a rushed service. But the word hazelnut sat near the bottom, under the flavor description. The silence that followed had no manners left in it. Martin stared at the label. It was a replacement, he said, almost to himself. The original citrus syrup ran out. The resident doctor moved closer to Charles, speaking quietly, professionally, asking about symptoms, breathing, throat tightness, whether he had taken more than the first small sip. Emma stepped back just enough to give space, but not so far that she stopped watching. Charles answered, but his voice had changed. It was lower, less certain. He had not taken a full drink, only enough to taste sweetness on his tongue. But now even the small tightness in his throat felt like a warning he had nearly punished someone for hearing. The hotel medical team was called from downstairs. Martin tried to speak again, but the bartender's clipboard had already been opened by the banquet assistant. The allergy check was skipped after the substitution, she said softly. She looked ashamed, but she said it. That mattered. Charles turned toward Martin. No anger. Not yet. Just the stunned expression of a man watching the perfect evening reveal its missing piece. You skipped it. Martin swallowed. We were behind schedule. I thought the approved menu covered everything. Emma's eyes lowered for a brief moment, not in victory, but in pain. The laminated card in her apron pocket pressed against her palm as she touched it through the fabric. Charles saw the gesture and understood that she had not been guessing from panic. She had been remembering from loss. The resident doctor nodded to Emma. You were right to stop him. The sentence moved across the table like a verdict, gentle but final. The donors who had laughed looked away. Mr. Cole stood silent. The bartender held the bottle as if it weighed more than glass. Charles looked at the untouched mocktail, then at the plain water Emma had placed in front of him, then finally at the waitress he had called a distraction. His face did not collapse. It changed more quietly than that. The confidence left his eyes, and in its place came shock, then shame, then the first honest understanding of the night. If Emma Walker had obeyed him, the room would have kept clapping while the danger stayed in his hand. Everyone around the table now knew the same thing. The waitress had seen the truth before the billionaire was willing to hear it. The hotel medical team arrived without sirens, without panic, with the quiet speed of people trained to make fear smaller by moving carefully. They checked Charles Bennett in a private lounge just off the ballroom, where the chandeliers gave way to softer lamps and the noise of donors became a distant murmur behind closed doors. Rain tapped lightly against the tall Seattle windows. Charles sat in a leather chair with his suit jacket open, the medical alert bracelet now visible on his wrist instead of hidden beneath his cuff. The auto-injector rested on the side table, unused but close. The plain water Emma had placed in front of him stood beside it, half full, more honest than the untouched mocktail being carried away in silence. The medical lead spoke gently, asking questions, checking his breathing, explaining that the small sip had been enough to warrant caution, but not enough to turn the room into a crisis because the drink had been stopped in time. Charles nodded, but the words reached him slowly. Stopped in time. Not by the event director. Not by the donors. Not by the billion-dollar company that made its fortune promising precision. By a waitress he had told to do her job. Emma stood near the lounge door with her tray held against her side, her face composed but tired. Martin Cole waited farther down the hall, no longer polished, speaking quietly with hotel management. The bartender sat on a bench with his head lowered, the syrup bottle sealed in a clear bag on the table beside the medical forms. No one was shouting. That made the consequences feel deeper. Charles looked at Emma. "You can go," he said, then heard how it sounded and closed his eyes briefly. Even now, command came to him faster than humility. He opened them again. "I mean, you do not have to stay." Emma gave a small nod. "I know." She did not move. The medical lead finished the final check and said Charles should be monitored, avoid the rest of the drink service, and follow up with his physician. Then the team stepped out, leaving the lounge quieter than before. Charles looked at his bracelet. For years, he had hidden it in public because he disliked the way people softened around vulnerability. He had built a company around saving lives, yet treated his own warning like an inconvenience to be tucked under a cuff. "I called you a distraction," he said. Emma's eyes did not harden. That almost made it worse. "You called the warning a distraction," she said. The sentence found the exact place his pride had been standing. He breathed out slowly. "And you stayed anyway." "I have left rooms before," Emma said. Her hand touched the apron pocket where the laminated card rested. "Sometimes leaving is easier. Sometimes it is not right." Charles looked at that small motion. He understood enough now not to ask carelessly. The card was not a prop. It was a weight she had chosen to carry quietly. "Your brother," he said, gently this time. Emma looked toward the rain-dark glass. "He was 12. Charles lowered his gaze. No apology could reach that far. Money could not. Influence could not. Naming a hospital wing could not. "I am sorry," he said. It was not polished. It was almost too small. That made it real. Emma accepted it with silence. Outside the lounge, the dinner program continued in a softer, uncertain rhythm, as if the whole hotel had learned that elegance could still fail a human being. Charles stood slowly, not to reclaim the room, but to face what it had cost to be wrong. "I can thank you privately and let everyone call this a catering mistake," he said. "Or I can admit that the system ignored the only person paying attention." Emma did not answer for him. She only stood there, steady in her black apron, while the billionaire looked at the closed ballroom doors and decided whether his pride deserved protection more than the next life did. Charles Bennett did not return to the ballroom immediately. For several minutes, he stood outside the closed doors and listened to the muffled sound of applause meant for a program that no longer felt complete. Emma Walker waited beside the lounge entrance, still in her white shirt, black vest, and clean black apron, still holding the service tray because no one had told her what to do with her hands after almost saving a life. Charles looked at the doors, then at Martin Cole speaking in a corner with hotel management, then at the donors beyond the glass who would soon expect a polished closing statement. He could have stepped back into that room and called the incident a minor dietary oversight. People would have accepted it. Wealth often gave mistakes softer names. Instead, Charles walked in without the drink, without the prepared remarks, and without the smooth expression that had carried him through 1,000 rooms. The applause began, then faded when people saw his face. He stood at the microphone for a moment, one hand resting lightly on the podium, the medical alert bracelet visible beneath his open cuff. "Tonight," he said, "someone at the edge of this room saw what the center of it missed." No one spoke. Emma remained by the side door, half hidden behind the service cart, her expression unreadable. Charles did not say her pain. He did not turn her into a story for donors to applaud. He only said the system had failed because it valued speed over listening, appearance over caution, and hierarchy over the person paying attention. Then he asked the hotel to suspend the dinner service review until every allergy protocol, substitution rule, and staff warning procedure had been examined. It was not dramatic. It was better than dramatic. It was responsible. 1 month later, the first training session was held in a modest conference room at the Langford House Hotel. Not a ballroom, not a stage, just rows of chairs, coffee, notebooks, and servers, bartenders, managers, and event staff from across Seattle sitting beside hospital volunteers and restaurant owners. Bennett Medical Ventures funded the program, but Charles did not put his face on the banner. There was no banner. Emma helped design the first checklist, not because she had a degree framed on a wall, but because she knew what it felt like to speak from the edge of a room and be treated like noise. She kept the laminated allergy card in her apron pocket that day. Its worn corners rested against her palm while she watched a young server practice asking a guest about ingredients with a clear, steady voice. After the session, Charles found Emma near the window overlooking the gray Seattle street. He wore a dark suit, but his cuff was open enough for the bracelet to show. That small choice said more than his money could. "You were never a distraction," he said quietly. Emma looked at him. "I know." He nodded, accepting that the lesson had been his, not hers. "You were the only person listening." For a moment, the rain moved softly against the glass. Emma drew the laminated card from her pocket and looked at it, not as a wound this time, but as something that had carried her from grief into purpose. "My brother used to hate being treated like he was fragile," she said. Charles did not rush to answer. He had learned the dignity of silence. "Maybe this helps someone listen faster next time," he said. Emma placed the card back into her apron pocket and picked up the training folders. There was still work to do. There would always be work to do. But when she walked toward the door, Charles stepped aside first, not because she had saved him, but because he finally saw her. And sometimes dignity begins in that small, quiet space where a powerful man stops asking who matters and starts listening before it is too late.